House will come to order. House will come to order. We have a few bills on the calendar, but until some more members decide to come back and go to work, we're going to ask the clerk to read the caption to a group of privileged resolutions. Mr. Clerk.
Honoring the life and memory of Lauren Christara Sawyer. Honoring the life and memory of Kenneth Eugene Irvin. Honoring the life and memory of Jamita Orange during Women's History Month. Commending the Valley of Columbus Ancient Accepted Scottish Rite upon its centennial anniversary, recognizing and commending Little Zion Baptist Church on the occasion of its 100th anniversary, commending the Hebron Christian Lions girls basketball team for winning the 2023 GHSA 3A State Girls Championship, recognizing and commending University System of Georgia outstanding scholars on Academic Recognition Day for 2023, commending Al Shorey, Darlington High School's 2023 Star Teacher, commending Kaiua Yang, Darlington High School's 2023 Star Student, recognizing the Civil Air Patrol for their service to citizens of Georgia, commending the Leadership Academy sponsored by the DeKalb County chapter of 100 Black Men of America Incorporated, recognizing and commending Charles S. Johnson IV, recognizing and commending Clifford Kahn, recognizing and commending Jeannie Joseph, founder of the Common Sense Childbirth Incorporated, recognizing March 23rd, 2023 is Widows and Widowers Day at the Capitol. And for other purposes, that completes the reading of the privilege resolution.
Is there any objection to adopting the privileged resolutions? Chair hears none, and the resolutions are adopted. We're going to leave our rules calendar for today and go back and pick up a bill that was on our consideration, our rules calendar Thursday we didn't get to. Mr. Clerk, will you read the caption to SB 149?
Senate Bill 149 by Senator Albers, the 56 and others to be entitled an act to amend Article 2 of Title 11 of the Official Code of Georgia Annotated relating to sales under the Commercial Code so as to enact the Georgia Door-to-Door Sales Act. This bill having been referred to the Committee on Agriculture and Consumer Affairs, that committee recommends that this bill do pass by committee substitute.
Chairman Dickey is recognized to present the bill, but first he has to tell us what kind of effect the freeze had on the peach crop. If you don't mind, Mr. Chairman, before you present the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish I had better news about the peach crop, but this morning when I left Missoula, it was 25 degrees and turned freezing at 3 o'clock, and I'm afraid we've got a lot of frozen dead peaches, but you know, Parm's always optimistic, so I'm optimistic. We've got a few left, but we will see as the days go on. So thank you, everyone, for your asking and concern, and you mornings like this, I think we set a record in making Georgia for the lowest temperature on this date. So, but it makes you understand who's in control, and it's not us. And but God's good.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If you will present the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and colleagues. I bring you SB 149. It's a consumer bill. Consumer protection bill, one of the best ones I've seen. It's for large unsolicited door-to-door transactions. It's modeled after the Federal Trade Commission's national door-to-door cooling off period that we've had since 1992, and that's just a 3-day cooling off period. But when we have these large unsolicited door-to-door salesmen, this bill takes it to a 30-day cooling off period with 3 elements that might happen. It's unsolicited, it's $10,000 or more in cost. It includes a leasing or a financing of 10 years or more and eligible for federal tax credits. And so this bill just really simply gives our Georgia consumers more time to check the information that they're presented to them unsolicited. Some of these large transactions are very complex, very large, ties our consumers up for many years on these, and so I think the bill is tailored to not to include some other transactions, but these large ones. A lot of these solar transactions are what this bill is really targeted toward, and I just want to also thank our House Committee, Chairman Parsons and Representative Gullett, for working on this for several years as too. This is not their bill, but they have really targeted some other legislation that would help in this area for our consumers. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I would happy to take any questions.
You have no questions.
Thank you. I ask your favorable consideration.
The gentleman has yielded the well. Is there any objection to the previous question being ordered? The chair hears none. The previous question is ordered. Is there any objection to adopting the committee substitute? The chair hears none. The committee substitute is adopted. Is there any objection to agreeing to the report of the committee, which was favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Shall this bill now pass? All in favor of the passage of the bill will vote yes. All those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machine. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machine. On the passage of the bill, the yeas were 160, the nays 1. The bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. We're back on the rules calendar for Monday, March 20th. Mr. Clerk, will you read the caption to SB 42?
The Senate Bill 42 by Senator Hodges is the third and others to be entitled an act to amend Code Section 16-547 of the Official Code of Georgia Annotated relating to posting model notice with human trafficking hotline information in businesses and on the internet so as to increase the fine for failure to comply with model notice requirements. This bill having referred to the Committee on Judiciary and Non-Civil, that committee recommends that this bill do pass.
Representative Will Wade from the 9th House District is recognized to present the bill.
Thank you, Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, I rise to present to you Senate Bill 42. This is a governor's priority bill, and I also want to say I appreciate this House taking up the issue and the seriousness of human trafficking in our state and in this country. And I believe we also need to give a true shout out to the First Lady of Georgia, Marty Kemp, who has prioritized this effort and brought grace to the process, but also meaning. Today, this bill just does two things to existing code. We're taking a may to a shall as it relates to minimum and maximum fines. And I believe that this is also in partnership with our communities and businesses, because I believe that most business owners want us to continue to be the #1 state in which to do business, and a simple notification to ensure that we can protect folks in this state, women especially and children, is warranted. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions. If not, I'm happy to yield the well and appreciate your favorable consideration.
You do have a question. Would you accept the question?
I'll take one question, yes.
The gentleman from the 6th to your right Representative Jason Ridley is recognized for a question.
May I rescind? I'm just kidding. Yes, I'll yield for my friend.
I don't blame you. You yield.
I do.
Just one question. I meant to ask you this morning. We got off on something else. Is this for every single business?
No.
Okay, it's just a high-risk business.
It's high-risk businesses. It's no change from previous code. I'm happy to read the list if the gentleman needs.
Oh no, sir. I'm good. I was just curious. And then my next question was going to be where do they get the posters at? But we can talk about that offline. I was just.
There's a link, and we can provide that. Law enforcement agencies, and we can make sure. And that is an 8.5 by 11, very easy for most businesses to print and post.
All right. Thank you. Thank you for bringing this bill.
With that, Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the body's favorable consideration. And again, thank you to Governor Kemp and First Lady Kemp for leading on this issue. I yield the well.
The gentleman has yielded the well. Is there any objection to the previous question being ordered? The chair hears none. The previous question is ordered. Is there any objection to agreeing to the report of the committee, which was favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Shall this bill now pass? All in favor of the passage of the bill will vote yes. All those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machine. Representative Maynard. Have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machine. On the passage of the bill, the yeas were 167, the nays 0. The bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. Mr. Clerk, will you read the caption to Senate Bill 44?
Senate Bill 44 by Senator Hatch to the 50th and others, be entitled an act to amend Title 16 of the Official Code of Georgia annotated relating to crimes and offenses, so as to provide for the mandatory minimum penalties for violation of the Street Gang Terrorism and Prevention Act. This bill I referred to the Committee on Judiciary and Non-Civil. That committee recommends that this bill do pass by committee substitute.
Before we begin debate on this bill, I'll let all the members know we do have members that will speak in the author will present the bill. We have members in favor, those opposed, and we have a minority report. And we do have some time limits. So we would adhere to those time limits. Chair recognizes Governor Floor Leader Hong to present the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am here to present Senate Bill 44 on behalf of the governor. This bill revises the punishment for violations of the Georgia Street Gang and Terrorism Prevention Act. It provides for enhanced sentencing for recruiting when such violation involves a person under 17 or a person with a disability, and additionally codifies the current practice for issuing OR bonds. So specifically, this bill will establish a mandatory minimum sentence of 5 years if you are in violation of the criminal street gang statute. In addition, it's going to enhance penalties on those adult gang members who are recruiting our children that are under 17. Gangs must recruit in order to survive. And we are sending a strong message with this bill that if you come into our state and you are recruiting our children, then we will have severe punishment for you. Through this bill, we are helping our victims. We are helping victims of gang activity as well as our children from being recruited into gangs. In addition, we are codifying what current judges are doing as far as OR bonds or unsecured judicial release. So it will have the judges look to whether or not a accused has been convicted of any bail jumping in the last 5 years. It will also have the judge look to whether or not there's been a bench warrant that's been issued in the last 5 years, and it does not affect any traffic offense failure to appear. In addition, it will have the judge look to any criminal history of the accused when considering OR bonds. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I will yield for any questions.
You have no questions, but you do have
Thank you.
a couple now.
Okay.
Almost got it done. To your left, Representative Moore, to your left has a question. Representative Moore is recognized for a question.
Good morning. Does the gentlelady yield well?
I do.
Not the well, but yield.
Yes.
When you said the mandatory, is that 5 years or 10 years? Because the mandatory minimum in Georgia is 10. Is that correct?
No, it's not. Currently, this is enhancing it to 5 years. Currently, it's 3 years is the
Okay.
minimum.
Now, would the judge have leeway to go to the maximum of 10?
So this bill is going to increase the sentencing from 5 to 15 years. And just like any sentencing, as far as judges go, judges can look to and sentence up to the maximum if needed. Correct.
I see. So 5 to 15 years.
5 to 15 years for gang activity. Now, if you are recruiting someone that is under 17, then the sentence goes from 5 to 20 years.
And do you further
Or, I'm
yield?
sorry, 10 to 20 years.
You further yield?
Yes.
Now, when we talk about mandatory minimums, that is without any chance for parole. Is that correct?
So it depends. It depends on the crime. It depends on the sentencing. So if, as far as the gang activity portion goes, and this is gang activity, if you're a leader, if you're recruiting, so there are different things that the judge is going to look at in order to factor in the sentencing portion. And so if the judge decides to minimize that, they will have to go through certain requirements to see whether or not the accused fits into that category or not in order to go off of the mandatory minimum sentencing. And the judge has to put on record why the judge did not follow the minimum sentencing. If you are recruiting those that are under 17, there is no going off of the mandatory minimum.
Right. No chance at all for parole during the mandatory minimum.
No, ma'am.
And if, in fact, the judge did decide to go to the maximum of 10 to 20, there would not be any
That's correct.
any chance for parole as well.
That's correct.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. I do.
The lady yield. Representative Roberts, right out in front of you, is recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the gentlelady yield?
I do.
In this bill, you talk about recruiting is 17 and under. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Does it distinguish a recruiter who is actually under 17 themselves?
No, it doesn't, and I think that it's good that we don't distinguish that, because then you are opening the gate for gang members to actually use those that are under 17 in order to recruit and in order to continue gang activity. So this bill will focus on those adults that are recruiting those that are under 17. If you are under 17 and recruiting those that are under 17, they will be prosecuted under the juvenile code as a juvenile.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Lady, further yield.
I will yield for one more question, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from the 15th, Representative Gamble, has a question straight out in front of you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the gentlelady yield?
I do.
Is it not true that this bill is codifying best practices of judges across the state in regard to issuing OR bonds?
That is correct, and as somebody that does practice regularly in front of courts, I know that judges do look at criminal history as well as any type of bench warrants or failure to appear in the past.
Does the gentlelady further yield?
I do.
Is it not further true that this bill does not preclude a judge from issuing an OR bond and ensures to the public that at the very least a judge has reviewed the most relevant information applicable to an individual's bond determination?
That is correct, and it does state that the judge may, so correct.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I respectfully ask for a yes vote on this bill, and I yield the well.
The lady has yielded the well. We have some folks in favor and some opposed. Representative Tanya Miller is recognized for up to 30 minutes. Representative Miller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good afternoon, colleagues. I stand before you today to speak against the passage of Senate Bill 44. As a former federal and state prosecutor and current defense and civil rights attorney, I have spent more than 20 years, believe it or not, on the front lines of our criminal justice system, working to make neighborhoods safer by ensuring that both criminals and our judicial system are held accountable. Now, before I get started on my rationale for asking you to oppose Senate Bill 44, I want to give you a hypothetical, just so that it is really clear what the applicability of these mandatory minimums will do. Let's say, for example, there are 3 young men, 17 years old, who get together for the purposes of committing crimes. That's essentially all it takes to be considered a criminal street gang in Georgia. 3 or more people who associate or organize for the purpose of committing crimes. Now, those crimes do not have to be violent. Those crimes can be misdemeanors. There is a possibility that people will organize or associate to commit crimes that are not violent. So just put a pin in that as I share this hypothetical. 3 boys, let's say they're from my neighborhood, Grant Park, right? I'll use my neighborhood so it's not putting one else's neighborhood on blast. These 3 boys call themselves the Grant Park Boys. They're 3 seniors at Jackson High School, and they like to get together to tag or do graffiti on buildings. They do smiley faces, and they do it on lockers. They also like to get together and pool their money after school to buy marijuana. Now, let me stop there, because I want you to know that nothing in my comments is meant to endorse any of this behavior. Criminal street gang behavior is bad. It is wrong, and it is something that we ought to actually come up with policies that combat against. But let's just stick with this hypothetical for a second. These 3 17-year-old boys have just violated Georgia's Gang Act, which, by the way, is the most robust, the most comprehensive, and the most powerful in all of the United States. There is no dispute about that. My Grant Park boys get arrested. My Grant Park boys get charged with participating in criminal street gang activity. Those boys will each face a mandatory minimum sentence of 5 years in prison to serve in the Department of Corrections. 5 years to serve. Now let's say one of those 17-year-old boys pulls his 16-year-old cousin to come along with them when they pool their money together to buy some marijuana to smoke at one of their houses. Now that 17-year-old boy who has recruited someone under the age of 17 to participate in criminal street gang activity, that 17-year-old boy is facing a mandatory minimum 10 years to serve in the Georgia Department of Corrections. This bill is too inflexible. It is too broad, and it does not do what we actually need to be doing to keep our communities safer. And by the way, that 10-year mandatory minimum sentence, nobody has the discretion to reduce, not the prosecutor and not the judge. So that 17-year-old boy, no matter what his previous condition is before getting arrested, will be going to the Department of Corrections under this bill. That will be legal in the state of Georgia. Under SB 440's penalties, We are not doing the best that we can to get at what it is that we all really want to get at, and that is the most violent offenders in our community. Violent criminals must be held accountable. Nothing in what I'm saying to you today is meant to undermine this principle. I say this as having been a person who prosecuted violent felonies for more than a decade. Murders, rapists, child molesters. I can tell you that I have seen in my career on the front lines of our criminal justice system the worst of the worst. I have made sure that people have gone to prison for the rest of their lives when the facts and the law require it. So understand, this position is not one that comes out of a place of softness or naivete, however we say that, about what is happening in our criminal justice system. Senate Bill 44 is wrong because it won't make us safer. This bill will move our state backwards solely for the purpose of appearing to be tough on crime. So when it comes to public safety, I give this bill an F, and let me tell you why. One, this bill strips flexibility away from our Superior Court judges. This bill is not supported by facts and what is actually happening in our communities as it relates to the recruitment of young people into gangs. Here is a news flash. There's not some big homie from LA that's taking a plane to Georgia, creeping around playgrounds, and recruiting teenagers to become members of the Gangster Disciples. It is far more likely that the people who are recruiting children into criminal street gangs are themselves children. So if we really care about saving our kids, if we really care about doing what is best for the most vulnerable among us, we ought to vote no against this bill, and we ought to get down to the business of doing the things that stop kids from joining gangs in the first place. This bill fails to implement evidence-based strategies actually proven to prevent children from being recruited into gangs and making us safer. Now, I know this is not a popular position to take. It is not difficult to stand up here as a former prosecutor, as a person who ran on community-centered public safety, and tell you to vote no against this bill. So I'm going to spend some time explaining to you and to the public why I think it's so important that we do. First of all, this bill lacks flexibility. What does Senate Bill 44 say to our Superior Court judges, the gatekeepers of justice in our state, the people who actually see defendants and victims and hear all the facts in any given case? Senate Bill 44 suggests that those currently holding the political power believe that they know better than any judge how to best affect justice in any particular case. It is sometimes worth reminding ourselves that the separation of powers is enshrined in our state's Constitution for good reason. The separation of powers is crucial to our democratic form of government. It works to prevent the concentration of power in any one branch, and it provides for those checks and balances that we learned about in 8th grade social studies. In one way, this bill would strip sentencing power away from our judges and give it to prosecutors. So there are two sentencing provisions in this case. One makes any criminal street gang activity offense, whether the people are committing violent crimes or not, a mandatory minimum 5 years to serve. That's the first part. The second enhancement would make the recruitment of a 17-year-old by any person, including a minor, a mandatory minimum 10 years to serve, for which there is no deviation. And so I want to correct something and make it clear before I go any further, because there will be circumstances under which people who are 16 and who are 15 and who are 14, if they are charged as adults in our criminal justice system, they will be subject to the same mandatory minimum sentences as adults. Let me say that again to be clear. There are mechanisms in our law to charge people as young as 14 as adults. There are mechanisms in our law to remove children from juvenile court and have their cases adjudicated in superior court as young as 14. Those kids, if they are also accused of recruiting someone under the age of 17, will be subject to these mandatory minimums in our current judicial system as this bill is written. Be clear on what you're saying today if you vote yes to this bill. Now, while the first part of the sentence, the mandatory 5 for any criminal street gang activity, can be reduced by a prosecutor if they choose to do so, it's in their sole discretion, okay? Can be reduced by a judge, but only under very limited circumstances. The judge can depart from the 5 years after 7, I think it's 6 or 7 factors are met, and they all have to be met, and the judge does not have the ability to say, well, 6 of the 7 are met, so I want to depart. Or 4 of the 7 are met, I want to depart. That is why this statute as written is so inflexible. And I've already told you that on the recruiting element of it, there is no deviation from anybody. Our laws need to be flexible enough. They need to be nimble enough to allow us to deal appropriately with the most violent among us and to restore and rehabilitate the ones that we can. This bill robs our criminal justice system of this carefully crafted balance. And my friends, this balance is important. It is critical to making us safer. This bill is not based on facts. It wasn't so long ago that Governor Deal established the Georgia Council on Criminal Justice Reform with the blessing and support of this body. Governor Deal realized that the way our state was handling crime and punishment needed to be rethought, both from a human and an economic perspective. Over a 5-year period, the Council on Criminal Justice Reform conducted a comprehensive review of every aspect of our state's criminal justice system. That comprehensive review led to a series of reforms to our criminal justice system, including, this is some, not all, reducing some nonviolent felonies to misdemeanors, which of course decreased the population in our prison, increased the number of accountability courts from 3 to 150, which take in veterans, the mentally ill, and those suffering from addiction who have committed nonviolent crimes, and connects them with the appropriate wraparound services that they need, all under the supervision of a court, all for the purpose of diverting them from our prisons. These reforms reduce the rate of recidivism and the number of incarcerations dramatically. Now, this is pre-COVID, because I think once you talk about COVID, the numbers start to skew a little bit, as they have all across the country. But from 2009 to 2018, the number of offenders sent to Georgia prisons dropped by almost 20% based on just these reforms. And the number of Black Georgians who were in prison dropped by 30%. All of this was done in good faith by Governor Deal, by the Supreme Court Justice, Chief Justice Boggs, and all of the members who participated with a focus on public safety, which led to an overall drop in our crime rate because the reforms focused on redemption, rehabilitation, fair sentencing, and appropriately saving our resources for the worst offenders among us. What we are witnessing here today, some might argue, is an attempt to usurp the authority of our judicial branch for the purpose of what appears to many to be political grandstanding. There are some who believe that signing this bill into law would send a, quote, strong message to gang leaders. To paraphrase a message we have heard at the highest levels of our state government, you come after our children and endanger our communities, we will come after you. That certainly sounds tough. But what actually does this bill propose to do in reality, affirmatively, to protect our children? Senate Bill 44 is too clunky. It's too inflexible. It provides no safeguards for juvenile offenders who often become involved with gang activity as a result of other juveniles. Instead of adopting evidence-based strategies seeking to prevent violent crimes, including strengthening educational wraparounds for poor students, at-home interventions that have been proven to help poor kids who lack parental guidance and support at home, housing support for children who are experiencing homelessness. I cannot tell you how many folks out here join gangs because they don't have anywhere else to go. They are literally hungry. They are literally stealing Vienna sausages from gas stations. Employment programs for our young people. Increased access to programs proven to reduce gang involvement by strengthening mentorship programs. This bill prescribes a one-size-fits-all approach that is heavy on prison and light on hope. Now, gangs and gang violence are a serious problem, and that absolutely must be addressed. It must be addressed, and there are ways to do it. We must focus our deterrent efforts on the few who are causing the most problems. We must be smart about how we utilize our resources to focus on the most dangerous among us. We cannot continue to keep painting with a broad brush because the sound bites make hay for us back home. Any serious attempt to address the problem of children being recruited into gangs must begin with tackling the root causes. We know which children are most at risk at becoming involved with a gang. Let's save those children. Let's help those children. Let's interrupt the process of gang recruiting in a meaningful way. It's not a mystery. The primary factors are child abuse and neglect, academic problems, disciplinary problems at school, a lack of parental involvement, poverty, hunger, and homelessness, alcohol and drug abuse, and of course, mental health problems. When children are acting out, it is not because something is inherently wrong with them, it's more often because something has happened to them. We are most often seeing the impact of, quote, adverse childhood experiences. Living in a state of poverty in and of itself is deemed an adverse childhood experience. Children and young people join gangs for many reasons. Their brains are still developing. Remember this conversation from last week about how 17-year-olds just don't have the mental capacity to know what's best? It's not certain 17-year-olds, it's all of them. It's the nature of being a 17-year-old or a 16-year-old or a 14-year-old or a 15-year-old. They cannot and often do not make wise choices. Anybody ever raised a teenager? Especially in the absence of positive role models and alternatives in their lives. According to the most recent data from Kids Count, 20% of all children in Georgia, 20% of our precious children in this state, they're still precious, right? 20% of our children in Georgia are living below the poverty level. Of those 20%, half are living in what is defined as extreme poverty. If we truly want to address violent crime and gangs and interrupt the lifeblood, which is in fact the recruitment of young children, we cannot and should not ignore this connection. Many young people, ask any prosecutor or defense lawyer or social worker or judge. Many young people join gangs because an older sibling or a neighbor is involved in the gang. This bill is disproportionately more likely to harm teenagers and minors with slightly older siblings or family members who might be associated with these gangs? Are we as legislators really prepared to take the responsibility for these unintended consequences for 14 and 15 and 16 and 17-year-old kids being sent to prison for mandatory minimum terms of 10 years without regard to whether or not they actually did anything violent? This bill will eradicate the backstop of judicial discretion and in some cases prosecutorial discretion. Please read it closely. As I stated in my hypothetical, the 17-year-old who recruits the 16-year-old to tag buildings and smoke marijuana would not have the ability to have a prosecutor or a judge reduce that sentence. Our judges should be trusted to do their jobs, to hear all case facts, and to provide sentences appropriately. If they don't, we should trust the voters to remove them, or the Judicial Qualifications Commission to discipline them. We as legislators should not substitute our judgment for theirs in these very fact-specific, important determinations. Each individual case is different and is made up of different facts, people, circumstances. It's the duty of our judges. They get a lot of practice at it, believe it or not, to weigh all of these factors and to consider them in the sentencing process. It is a fact that this bill, should it become law, will disproportionately affect people of color. It will disproportionately affect people of color. If we are sincere about protecting all of our children from being recruited into gang membership, then I emphatically ask you, why are we not willing to do more to invest in proven gang prevention programs that would benefit these very children? Let's invest time and resources in addressing the factors that make these children vulnerable in the first place, that make them prime targets to be recruited or enticed into gang membership. Instead, we are about to spend untold sums of money locking the door indiscriminately on their futures. We could do so much more in this state to ensure that the children in Georgia don't feel the need to join a criminal gang. We know that 95% of a child's brain development happens within the first 5 years of life. Let's talk about some of the things we can do before the child reaches the age of kindergarten. Why are we not providing pre-kindergarten for all Georgia's children? We know that the number of quality-rated preschool providers in our state is woefully inadequate for our population. In over half of the 159 counties in Georgia, there are fewer than 50% of the daycare providers that meet quality-rated standards. How many of you are aware that only about 5 to 7% of all eligible families in our state receive subsidies for child care from the Georgia Department of Early Care and Learning due to a lack of funding and resources? What does this say about how much we truly care about our, quote, most vulnerable children? We know that quality after school programs keep our young people out of trouble and out of the reach of potential bad actors in our community. Yet there are 250,000 Georgia children who are at home unsupervised during after school hours every day due to a lack of funding for programs in their communities that would provide for after school care. Another primary purpose of SB 44, I keep wanting to call it 440, that was another SB bill, as expressed by the supporters, is that it will be an effective deterrent to criminal gang activity. We've talked about this debate about whether or not mandatory minimums are actually an effective deterrent to criminal gang activity or to crime in general. I'm going to let you in on a little secret. It's probably not one that a lot of you don't know, especially if you worked in our criminal justice system. People who commit crimes especially children who commit crimes, have no clue about what we do down here. They don't know penalties. How can they be deterred by something that they don't even know? Many of them don't even understand the difference between a public defender and a prosecutor when they get into the courtroom. I've actually had to explain that to children that I've represented. Georgia already has, as I stated before, one of the most robust anti-gang statutes in the entire country, and it has been in place for many, many, many years. We're probably number one in terms of legislation combating gangs. Yet our anti-gang laws have not deterred gangs from taking root in our community. Why? Because it takes more than just passing laws. As a Fulton County prosecutor, as I told y'all, I served in both the crimes against women and children and the homicide unit. Again, this is not me being naive, but we just have got to understand and realize that there has to be an ability for the folks who are working on the front lines to have flexibility. When we lock the door and throw away the key, we must always remember that that is not the end. The offender is still connected to the community. That offender will most often one day return to the community, and the longer they've been incarcerated, the harder it is to re-enter them into society, the more difficult it is for them to become productive members of society, to get housing, to get jobs, to not recidivate. This does not make us safer. With 1 out of every 18 adults under some form of correctional control, Georgia has the highest rate of correctional supervision in the country. To put this in perspective, Georgia's rate of correctional control is 73% higher than that of Pennsylvania, the state with the second highest. Being tough on crime requires more than standing behind a microphone and saying, if you come for our children, we'll come after you. We have a systemic problem in our communities where gang violence has taken hold. It is rooted in poverty, it is rooted in fear, and it is rooted in hopelessness. Local communities should be incentivized to come together, bring all stakeholders to the table, and create plans that will work to prevent violent crime. These plans must be both law enforcement led and community centered and led by the folks in our community. My distinguished House colleagues, I implore you to question why we are departing from the path Governor Deal placed us on in 2011, a national model for successful criminal justice reform initiatives, a path that led to lower rates of incarceration and thus saving taxpayer money, a path that led to 1,729 people graduating from Georgia Accountability Courts in 2017 alone, with each graduate producing over $22,000 in economic benefits and savings to the state. In all, more than $38 million, because we were able to divert when it's appropriate, when we are flexible, when we operate based on facts. And this information came from the University of Georgia Carl Vinson Institute. In summary, this is what we should be focused upon in this body: continuing down the path of proven criminal justice reform work, investing in solutions that are based upon evidence and facts. I implore you to reconsider your support of Senate Bill 44, especially if your true intent is to solve the problem of young children being recruited into gangs. Let us take on the hard work of really and truly supporting our most vulnerable, our children, 1 of 5 of whom are living in poverty in our state. Let's tackle the root issues of poverty and hopelessness by investing our resources in the programs we know that make a difference in terms of preventing our children from even being enticed by a gang in the first place. And let us get back on the path that we have deviated from, the one that is proven to be effective and to save taxpayer dollars. Thank you. I yield, Mr. Speaker.
The lady has yielded the well. We will now have up to 30 minutes for those who want to speak in favor of the bill. Representative Barry Fleming is recognized to speak to Senate Bill 44. Representative Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members of the House. I rise today in support of Senate Bill 44. And I rise to tell you some real-life examples of why this package of anti-street gang legislation that we've been working on now with Governor Kemp's leadership really does work, and tell you some stories about that. The governor's floor leader asked me to come and share the information with the whole House that I did with the House Judiciary Committee when we debated the very bill that's right before you now. To understand what I'm about to tell you, you need to understand the geography of the part of the state that I come from. If you look at the map of Georgia over near the greater Augusta area, you will see that the area we call the CSRA, the Central Savannah River area, is really two metropolitan areas that act together as one. You've got the Augusta side with Columbia County and the surrounding counties of close to 500,000 people. Then right across the Savannah River, you've got the South Carolina portion of our metropolitan area, close maybe to 250,000 people, Aiken County, North Augusta, that area. The two communities, as I said, usually work at one, socially, business-wise. If you're an attorney, you quite often practice in both states because your client doesn't care where you practice. He wants you to handle his business for him. Well, unfortunately, the criminal gang system that we're fighting over there works the same way too. For the longest time, they didn't care if their business was on the South Carolina side or the Georgia side until recently, and something changed, and that's what I'm here to tell you about. With Governor Kemp's leadership over these past few years, as we have focused on cracking down on street gang crime in Georgia, it really has made a difference. And let me give you the example. In Georgia, over in the Augusta area for a while, we had a local prosecutor and a federal prosecutor that worked well together, and they took these tools that we have given them through these anti-street gang, and they started going after these street gangs. It got so bad, they said that when you would arrest the gang members and bring them to be booked, they would say, "Man, don't gang me. Man, don't gang me." Now, what does that mean? In their slang, that means they understand that when they get arrested on the Georgia side, the ability to put them behind bars for what they've done and keep them there away from our kids and our other family members that are being harmed was much more significant than if they had been arrested on the South Carolina side. Also, South Carolina officials were talking about the rise in the gang activity on the South Carolina side and directly relating it to the fact that the gangs got smart and they were moving out of the Augusta area across the Savannah River to South Carolina because it was easier for them to do business there. And it was easier for them to get away and not get punished as severely for some of the horrendous things that they were doing in our community. Ladies and gentlemen of this House, that is a real-life example of how our focus on anti-street gang laws and why Senate Bill 44 fits in there is exactly the right way for us to go. Anybody that stands here from this well and tries to tell you that this doesn't work, all you need is a couple of prosecutors who will do it. The good news on that is that we have passed laws to allow now our Attorney General to step into areas of this state where we have weak-on-crime prosecutors that won't use these gang laws that we've passed. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to tell you from my own community, this stuff will and does work when you use it. I urge you to once again vote yes for Senate Bill 44, another part, a great part of the governor's package of cracking down on gang crime in this state. Mr. Speaker, I yield the well.
The gentleman has yielded the well. Majority Leader Estration is recognized to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, I just felt compelled to come up here and talk with you about this bill here today. I recall the old saying, you're entitled to your own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts. And I unfortunately think that what we've heard from the well earlier today is just inconsistent with the facts. And I'd like to really focus on the language that's in the bill and really talk to you as a former prosecutor myself and the experience that I've had observing the criminal justice system. Earlier today, we heard, in this bill, we heard debated that it's too inflexible, repeated, too inflexible. The judge has no discretion. If you actually look at the bill, it does provide discretion. Line 93, in the court's discretion, a judge may depart from the mandatory minimum sentence. Now, I really hope as this legislation is covered, that it's covered according to what's actually in the bill, not what members say here in the well. A judge is authorized to depart from the sentencing guidelines if the judge makes a determination that it's appropriate, and then if the judge, line 105 to 106, the judge shall specify on the record the circumstances for the reduction and the interest served by such departure. So the judge, in his or her discretion in the courtroom, can take a look at the facts that are involved in the case and do what's best to serve justice. So any assertion that a judge's hands are tied here by legislators is just inaccurate. Now, another issue was raised that the Georgia Council on Criminal Justice Reform was not supportive of mandatory minimums or work to remove those from the statute. And I served on that council for several years. And I'll just tell you, you can look at the state of our law. Mandatory minimums were not repealed under the Council on Criminal Justice Reform. No, in fact, the primary objective of the Criminal Justice Reform Council was to make sure that public safety was preserved as we really went at some of the underlying causes, such as addiction and drug crimes. We didn't repeal mandatory minimum sentences. No, what's happened is that term has now been used as a buzzword to try to attack legislation. And what we have put into the law is provisions, such as the one in this bill, to allow judges the discretion to do what's right under the circumstances, the judges closest to the facts. Now, additionally, as I understood what was said earlier from the well, there was an assertion that time could not be paroled. I even checked when I heard that, when I understood that to have been said, to verify. If Senate Bill 44 is enacted, Georgia Board on Pardons and Paroles will still make determinations as to how to grid these offenses. We're not doing anything as far as taking away the power to consider those convicted of being eligible for parole. That is still retained, even if this bill passes here today. So you're entitled to your own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts. And if you look at the legislation that's presented here today, this goes after a very serious criminal enterprise issue in our state. Criminal street gangs, it's been estimated are connected to over 50% of all violent crime in our state. And a way to address it is by getting aggressive, doing it in an appropriate manner, having sentences reflect the severity of the crimes. But this also does so while preserving flexibility for judges within the courtroom and maintaining the Board of Pardons and Paroles' independence to consider whether parole should be eligible in certain cases. I'd encourage your support of Senate Bill 44, and Mr. Speaker, I yield the well.
The gentleman has yielded the well. We have another speaker. Chairman Knight is recognized to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't come often to the well, but when things affect our communities, like gang violence, and you know it's affecting Georgia. Every day we get up and we watch the news and we watch another shooting, another drive-by. And we hear of people killed. We hear of even our fellow representatives get up and they come to the well, and we've recognized the death of innocent people because of gang violence. Well, it hits home. It hits home even in Griffin. And I heard the initial speaker got up here and gave eloquent testimony of why we shouldn't vote for this bill, and it was about protecting the most vulnerable, our children. Well, let me tell you what happened in Griffin a couple of years ago, and it just wrapped up in a trial. Back in July of 2020, some gang members planned an armed robbery to be able to join a local gang. And they drove up to the apartments, and the victim opened the door. They attacked the victim, and they shot him in the back of the head, and they robbed him. But his fiancée and his 2 small children were also in an apartment. And again, this was a recruitment, and this was a gang initiation. Our DA, who prosecuted this, and thank God that she's standing up for the innocent families and for these children who now don't have a father. She said, I'm going into schools, and she's seeing the firsthand impacts of gangs and what they're having on the young people across this state. It's not only those 2 children who lost a father, but it's the very innocent people that you want to protect. And she said that she's seeing children 10, 11, and 12 years old being recruited into gangs. And she said the Dakula case was a clear example of the type of recruitment, explaining that one of the other defendants who got convicted was recruited at the age of 12 years old. And that the shooter was 19 during this reported initiation. And it was overseen by an older 26-year-old leader. If we want to protect the most vulnerable, let's first of all think about the folks who are either getting killed or they're losing loved ones, children, parents. But if you really want to look at the most vulnerable, let's look at those children who are being put into gangs, and let's get rid of the people who are out there recruiting them. I urge you to support this. Let's think about the 2 children that don't have a dad anymore because they were recruitment into gangs and the gang violence that is plaguing this state. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman has yielded the well. Is there any objection to the previous question being ordered? The chair hears none. The previous question is ordered. There is a minority report on Senate Bill 44. Whip Park, you ready? Is recognized as the first speaker, I think, and he will allocate time as he sees fit for up to 20 minutes. Whip Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition to Senate Bill 44. I appreciate the intent of this bill. All of us want to protect children. All of us want safer communities. We all want to take actions to prevent gang violence. However, just like the bill we debated the prior legislative day, where the intent was to protect the children, even though the actual effect would be to harm children, which is why the Georgia chapter of the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention testified in opposition to that bill, I agree with my learned colleague, Representative Tanya Miller, that this bill will do more harm than good. SB 44 will not make us safer. Rather, it takes us backwards because it is not based on the facts, and it fails to implement evidence-based strategies actually proven to prevent violent crimes. Rather than protecting children and building safer communities for all Georgians that requires long-term investment in people. This bill will directly harm children. Under this bill, youth pressured to commit gang crimes will be incarcerated for a mandatory 5 to 20 years per line 61 to 66. Youth who recruit other youth will be incarcerated for up to 25 years. Incarcerated for up to 25 years per line 67 to 85. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, children and youth often report joining a gang for protection, and they are most likely to be recruited by their friends. Once a youth is in a gang, however, they face a higher risk of becoming a victim of violence. Those threats of violence increase the likelihood a youth will commit a crime during periods of active gang membership. Again, we're talking about minors here. We're talking about children. The average age at which a child joins a gang is 15 years old. Current Georgia law ensures that youth are subject to SB 44's punitive sentencing scheme. So not only will children be harmed by SB 44, this bill will not protect children from criminal gang activity, which requires a comprehensive, multifaceted, collaborative approach that involves prevention, intervention, and suppression strategies. Colleagues, what matters more than your intent for a piece of legislation is its effect, the impact it will have on the problem we are trying to address. Y'all, we live in the information age, not the Stone Age. We have the capability of researching, studying, and understanding what policies work best to address the shared problems we face. Even though we have that intellectual capacity, it remains a matter of choice and character as to whether or not we as legislators demonstrate the wisdom and humility necessary to find and implement those policies that serve the best interests of Georgians, rather than doubling down on failed policies that are politically expedient. Colleagues, mandatory minimum sentences are failed policies. They are failed policies, and that is not my opinion. And this is also why so many of my Democratic colleagues are so strongly opposed to mandatory minimums in this bill and in other pieces of legislation. As it was heard just a few moments ago, we are all entitled to our opinion, but not the facts. I urge y'all to look at lines 75 to 77, 80 to 82, and 83 to 84. It makes clear that there are multiple mandatory minimum sentences in this piece of legislation that shall not be reduced, suspended, or otherwise departed. As my colleague, Representative Tanya Miller, accurately described this bill, there is limited discretion in which a judge would have to clearly demonstrate 5 to 7 conditions that can then be appealed by the state court. This bill is possibly going to lock up children in this state for up to 25 years. That's what you're voting on. Mandatory minimum sentences are, again, failed policies. They fail to deter crime. They disproportionately harm people of color, and they fail to promote public safety. Governor Nathan Deal understood this. Under his leadership, Georgia became a leader in criminal justice reform. And so it is unfortunate to see his hard work and his legacy undermined by pieces of legislation like this and so many others that seem more focused on sending a political message rather than doing the hard work to keep all of us safe. Now again, it's not a mere opinion that mandatory minimums are a failed policy. One of the best studies on the ineffectiveness of mandatory minimums is a report by the United States Sentencing Commission. The report found that mandatory minimum sentences did not have a significant deterrent effect on crime and did not reduce recidivism rates. The report also found that mandatory minimums resulted in disproportionate sentences for people of color and low-level offenders. That's a report from almost a decade ago. Another study, published in the Journal of Criminal Law and Criminology in 2016, analyzed the impact of mandatory minimums on drug offenses in the United States. Again, no significant effect. Let's continue. Again, these are all publicly available studies. A National Research Council found that mandatory minimums had no clear impact on reducing crime or improving public safety. That report, again, almost from a decade ago, recommended that lawmakers consider alternatives to mandatory minimums, such as evidence-based sentencing practices that take into account the individual circumstances of each case. Now, there have been several studies specifically conducted on the impact of mandatory minimums on gang violence and participation. One study by the University of California, Los Angeles found that mandatory minimums did not reduce gang participation or violent crime. The study looked at the impact of mandatory minimums on gang-related crimes in California and found that there was no significant difference in the number of gang-related crimes before and after the implementation of mandatory minimums. The facts are clear, my colleagues. Mandatory minimums are ineffective. This bill will lock up more kids. Mandatory minimums are not an effective way to reduce gang violence or participation. As my colleague again further noted, there are clear unintended consequences associated with mandatory minimums. Multiple studies, again, done on policies enacted throughout multiple states over the past few decades. These unintended consequences range from increased violence to prison overcrowding that will only continue to support the private prison industrial complex to the detriment of Georgia taxpayer dollars. We have to take steps to address these problems at its root, rather than putting a band-aid trying to merely address the symptoms. Georgians deserve more than tough on crime messaging and mere intentions. We need real, evidence-based policy solutions to reduce gang participation and violent crime. SB 44 is not it. SB 44 will do more harm than good. Accordingly, I urge my colleagues to vote no to SB 44. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield the well.
Gentleman has yielded the well. The chair recognizes Representative Willis to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Greetings, honorable colleagues. I rise today in opposition to Senate Bill 44. There's intent and there's impact. Let us not pretend that we do not see the connectivity in all things. It is blatantly obvious that access begets progress and sustainable success. Gang violence is a fruit issue. A lack of opportunity, inequality, and systemic prison pipelines are in fact the root. Gang violence is the fruit of resource deserts, poverty. And although I absolutely appreciate proposals that fully fund QBE, more concretely, gang violence is a result of underfunding public education by $10.2 billion since 2003, putting Georgia 38th in the nation in per student funding, as we tout being the #1 place to do business. As written, these enhancements in SB 44 do not prevent crime. One in 5 Georgia children are living below the federal poverty level, with half of those living in extreme poverty. For years, my colleagues and I have proposed a state-earned income tax credit to help lift children and families out of poverty. What evidence-based anti-poverty measures has this body enacted? With the billions in surplus, thanks in part to austerity cuts before the pandemic and federal stimulus dollars, We can and we must do more to be good fiscal stewards of taxpayer dollars to in fact build safer communities. Addressing gang violence at its root requires comprehensive and sustained approaches that involve multiple stakeholders and effective strategies. Solutions: investing in education, strengthening community-based programs, providing mental health services, supporting law enforcement training efforts, addressing poverty and inequality, and providing job training and employment opportunities. We must attack the root to impact the fruit. These strategies are interconnected and cannot be implemented in isolation. We must work together to address these causes of gang violence and build safer and healthier communities for each of us and all of our districts. Imposing more mandatory minimum sentences is not the answer. Georgians deserve more than rhetoric. They deserve more than pageantry. We need real evidence-based policy solutions that are proven to reduce crime. Children make mistakes. The issue is that many people don't view these children as children at all. SB 44 causes irreversible harm to a generation. Accordingly, I urge my colleagues, each of you, to contemplate that fact and vote no to SB 44. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I yield the well.
The lady has yielded the well. Representative Roberts is recognized to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to start with a quote. Americans from across the political spectrum can unite around prison reform legislation that will reduce crime while giving our fellow citizens a chance at redemption. Any idea who said that? Let me tell you, it was former President Donald Trump when he signed the First Step Act into law. This quote was featured in an article published by the Nolan Center for Justice just last month. The Nolan Center was established by the American Conservative Union Foundation to provide leadership for the growing conservative consensus that our criminal justice system is badly broken and that there are proven conservative reforms that will keep the public safe while restraining costs. And for those who don't know what the ACUF is, it's one of the nation's oldest organizations representing grassroots conservatives throughout the United States. Founded more than 5 decades ago, and it works to advance conservatives' core values of liberty, personal responsibility, and fiscal responsibility, all of which are impacted by criminal justice reform. I don't think any of us here disagree that incarceration is often required for accountability, general deterrence, or keeping dangerous people off the street. But the Nolan Center clearly points out that incarceration for incarceration's sake makes no sense. It burdens taxpayers, harms families, hollows out our communities, and impacts the economy. So this article also went on to mention our very own Governor Deal in a list of conservative leaders who've supported a smaller and more effective criminal justice system. Their successes show that we can lower crime and incarceration rates at the same time if done properly. So just 5 months ago, in October 2022, leading national pollsters, Benison Strategy Group and Public Opinion Strategies, conducted a poll to understand voters' views on criminal justice reform and how they feel about candidates that support policies that will safely reduce the number of people incarcerated in jails and prisons. Consistent with past polling, new public opinion research shows that Republican voters continue to support criminal justice reform and are more likely to vote for candidates that do as well. So for efficiency, I'm only going to read, they broke it down between total GOP voters and very conservative GOPs. 62% of very conservative voters support criminal justice reform. 60% of very conservative voters believe it is important to reduce the jail and prison population. As far as impactful policy changes to safely reduce the jail and prison population, 78% of very conservative voters support allowing people in prison to earn additional time off their sentences for following prison rules and participating in rehabilitation programs. Okay. The biggest one is 62% support eliminating mandatory minimums and other sentencing laws that require a long prison sentence rather than allowing judges to determine the appropriate punishment based on the facts of this case. So this last election in 2022, this weak on crime theory worked, but it didn't actually work for your base. So I'm trying to understand, we're about to increase our budget from 2022 to 2023. The Georgia Department of Corrections increased the budget $154 million, and from amended FY23 to the proposed 2024, there's an additional $81 million in proposed budget. Taxpayers are going to bear this cost of rising prison populations. Decades of research show these policies will not make us safer. Think about what we could do with those hundreds of millions of dollars to actually put it in the communities and help these kids rather than sweeping them up in unnecessary legislation that will not work. So listen to your own voters and vote your conscience.
Representative Kennard is recognized to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in opposition to SB 44. This isn't a matter of smart on crime or soft on crime or hard on crime. Not soft on crime or hard on crime, but being smart on crime, and I mean that in the most literal way. I checked our most recent Department of Corrections statistics, and the majority of folks locked up in our state prisons dropped out of school. They're school dropouts. Another 38% went to 12th grade or have a GED. 9% or less have some college. And a microscopic 1.8% of those who have a 4-year degree represent our prison population. Less than 2% of our prison population is 4-year degree holders. So what I'm trying to communicate is that the greatest tool in our public safety toolbox is higher education. We get more Georgians through college with a 4-year degree. We almost eliminate them from the possibility of being incarcerated. Also, we understand the connection between literacy rates and potential incarceration. We know that kids not reading on a 3rd grade level are highly more likely to have an interaction with corrections. Did you know that we spend $5,400 to put a pre-K student through a year of state-funded pre-K? Do you know how much we spend to incarcerate an individual per year? That number is $27,000. The average sentence served is 5 years. You do the math, 27 times 5, that's $135,000 we're spending on the average person to incarcerate them. We can take 1 year of that, $27,000, and put someone through a 4-year degree in one of our college and university systems. So what I'm saying to you is that a smarter Georgia is a safer Georgia. And for that reason, I'm opposing this bill. We should be thinking about how we can get more folks in our pre-K. Right now, 60% of our 4-year-olds are in pre-K. Let's move that up to 100%. I got a fiscal note on that. It would cost about $250 million, and that would put every 4-year-old in our pre-K system. That would be the cost of tuition, teachers, and the capital outlay to build more classrooms and early child learning centers. So let's reinvest, let's rethink what we're doing. A smarter Georgia is a safer Georgia. Thank you.
The gentleman has yielded the well. That concludes our minority report. We'll move on now to the chair's time, up to 20 minutes. Chair of the committee, Chairman Tyler Paul Smith, is recognized to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield part of the chairman's time to Chairman Rob Leverett.
Representative Rob Leverett is recognized to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My father practiced law with Judge Robert M. Hurd for many, many years, a former member of this body. And he used to tell me, Robert, whenever you're given a legal opinion, it's usually a good idea to look at the law once in a while. Well, I would say the same is true when we consider legislation. A lot of opinions have been expressed, and I respect the opinions of the folks who have spoken from this well. I truly do. I would just suggest when we look at the bill, it doesn't seem to me to have quite the wide-ranging effect that has been described. The bill makes limited amendments to the gang statute. Specifically, it increases the penalties for recruiting a young person or a person with a disability. And it does admittedly do that. It makes them a good bit stiffer. And it does limit the discretion of the judge in some cases to depart from that. Of course, it doesn't do anything to the Board of Pardons and Parole's ability to parole or probate some of that sentence. That cannot be done constitutionally. It also does provide avenues for a judge to depart from these penalties in some circumstances. But I want to address an issue that has been raised today about the notion that we can do more. I agree. Criminal gangs have become a scourge of our society. They have multiplied lately. They're not just in urban areas, they're everywhere. They're in my district, a rural district. I share part of Representative Fleming's county, and we've heard from law enforcement down there how pervasive they are and how aggressive they are in committing crimes and recruiting young people. As it has been said, that's sort of their life's blood. And so this statute tries to address that through an enhanced penalty. And if you don't believe enhancing penalties has any effect, then I probably have lost you. But I do believe that is part of a sound strategy for addressing this issue. I agree we can do other things, and we should. Nothing in this bill prohibits us from taking other action. I agree we need a more holistic approach, and this doesn't preclude that. But I do believe part of the approach is stiffening penalties for people who recruit children into gangs. We need to get tougher with them. We're tough already, but we need to get tougher. There needs to be a proportional response to their action. And as Representative Fleming said, the evidence to me is that when you take that stance, when you get tough with them consistently, when you go after them, you begin to beat them back. And this statute will give prosecutors a tool to do that. Now, a bit has been said also about the impact this will have on children who are recruited into gangs, because it has been said, and I believe it to be true, that sometimes the recruiters are the children who just got recruited. They're recruited for the purpose of recruiting. And I think that does happen. I wouldn't question that. But keep in mind, nothing in this statute changes the rules on transfer of cases from juvenile court to superior court. People under 17 are still likely to be tried in juvenile court. There is a process where cases can be transferred one way or the other. There's also a process where DAs can transfer cases down to juvenile court if they think that's appropriate. But nothing changes what I view to be the strong policy and presumption in our law that favors trying those under 17 in juvenile court, not in superior court. And if they're in juvenile court, the minimums and the mandatory sentences in here are not going to apply anyway. They're going to be sentenced pursuant to the statutory framework for sentencing juveniles. So I would keep that in mind when you review this bill. I don't believe it's going to have quite the severe of the effect that has been characterized. Again, it just changes the penalty for recruitment. It generally leaves untouched the 5 to 20 penalty that currently exists for most violations of the gang statute. It also does allow for the departures, and that's to be done on an in-camera hearing to protect the person who's getting the departure from any kind of revelation to the members of the gang. And of course, it does address bonding too. But I believe all of this is a consistent, cohesive package that is part of a measured approach to attacking the evil of gangs in our society. I urge you to vote for this bill. I don't believe it's going to have a lot of the ill-intended effects that have been described, and I believe it's a consistent and smart part of any comprehensive approach to combating gang activity. It simply does not prohibit all of the other approaches, which I agree we need to employ. But I think this is a vital part of that strategy, and I encourage you to vote this so prosecutors can have this tool to combat this great evil. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman has yielded the well. There is a little time left on the chairman's time. Chairman Smith is recognized to speak to us further on the bill. Chairman Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I rise in favor of Senate Bill 44. You know, I was reminded, Mr. Speaker, and I could hear it just going over in my head, the Waylon Jennings song, "Don't You Think This Outlaw Business Has Done Got Out of Hand." And just for y'all's information, we referenced Waylon Jennings in our committee hearing. You may think I'm crazy, but Waylon Jennings had Hell's Angels that would follow around him as he did a tour as his personal bodyguards. Now, just so you know, being a member of a gang under current law and under this law is not a crime. It takes a nexus between breaking another statute and furthering the purposes of a gang activity. I've heard a lot of criminal justice measures that have been brought before both of these bodies at this point. And you know, I'm always mindful of Genesis chapter 3, the fall of humans and the banishment from the Garden of Eden. I see it all the time, but not just Genesis 3 with the fall of humankind. I see Genesis 9, the Noahic covenant. And we talk about the morality and how we can or we cannot legislate morality. Where do you think we got our murder statutes? Now, in particular, you look at this legislation. This legislation deals with those that are recruiting those that are 17 years of age or younger. We've already got laws on the books to deal with juveniles who have decided they want to cross that threshold of adulthood and start acting like an adult. We already have those statutes on the books, but what we're talking about is the corruption of our youth. Now, look, I agree with you. There's a lot of folks in jail right now on certain offenses that I think should have been released or bonded out by now. There's some offenses that they're just being held there because maybe the prosecutor's got a personal vendetta against that person. I deal with it all the time. I'm probably one of the only members here that has ever defended gang members. There's a few. Representative Panitch has, I know. There's several others of you here. And I can tell you, they have always been just so nice to their counsel. But you read about what they do. And in counseling these people, it's tough. Let me tell you, you're dealing with human beings. A lot of times remorseful. Again, I'm dealing with Genesis chapter 3 here, the fall. I'm dealing with fallen and broken humankind as we all are right here today. And you look at this, and so many times they say, only God can judge me. It's like, well, yes, He is the final judge when this all winds up for us. But let me tell you, you read over in Peter and you talk about having to abide by a man's law. What this bill in particular will do is take those that are recruiting our youth, 17 years of age or younger. You are going to have them off of the streets for 10 or 15 years. Like I said a while ago, I agree with you. There's folks sitting in jail right now that need to be bonded out. They shouldn't be there. I'll be the first to lead the charge on getting those folks out so we can put the worst of society, these gang members that are recruiting our youth, into those spots. I'm all for it. We as a society have to legislate what is right and what is wrong. We have to determine what is right and what is wrong. This bill right here, more than any other that has come to my committee, is one of personal responsibility. I've seen a lot of stuff that just make a defense lawyer want to go just pull his hair out. But you know, I was reminded of this quote from the judge starring Robert Duvall and Robert Downey Jr. And this phrase has stood out in my mind for a long, long time now. in my practice, and then having to discuss things with clients. So you'll see that there's a bail provision in this bill. Nobody talked about it hardly. And you know, I looked at it, and I cannot tell you how many conversations I've had with clients telling them this is not a dentist appointment. This is not going to the doctor. You can just reschedule it, which, Doc Newton, I always make sure I go to my doctor's appointments because I respect the time. It's like, no, this is the institution to where you don't show up, you get a bench warrant. You get to go spend some time in the county hotel. But this quote I want to leave with you here today. It goes as follows: you're standing in one of the last great cathedrals in this country, built on the premise that you and you alone are responsible for the consequences of your actions. There has to be personal responsibility. This bill brings that personal responsibility back. Mr. Speaker, with that, I'm going to yield the well and ask this body's favorable consideration.
The gentleman has yielded the well. That completes all the time we had allocated. Is there any objection to adopting the committee's substitute? The chair hears none. The committee's substitute is adopted. Is there any objection to agreeing to the report of the committee, which was favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Shall this bill now pass? All in favor of the passage of the bill will vote yes. All those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machine. For what purpose does Leader Beverly rise?
Move to lay Senate Bill 44 on the table.
The gentleman's moved to lay Senate Bill 44 on the table. Mr. Leader, I'm understanding that per the rules of this House, after the vote is open, that is not an appropriate motion. For what purpose does Representative Roberts rise?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Isn't it true that if what Representative Miller told us, that Georgia has one of the most robust gang laws in the country, and if Representative Fleming, who I know told the truth, said that gangs are fleeing to South Carolina, isn't it true that that means the existing laws on the books are working and this is overkill? Thank you.
I'm sure this lady believes in what she states. For what purpose does Representative Miller rise?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Mr. Speaker, isn't it true that under SB 44, a mandatory minimum sentence imposed pursuant to the paragraph relating to the recruitment of minors, quote, shall not be reduced, suspended, or otherwise departed from pursuant to paragraph 4 or 5 of this subsection? Those are lines 83 through 85, and paragraph 5 references the court's discretion. So, to be clear, Mr. Speaker, is it not true that a judge cannot depart when the accusation is that an individual has recruited a minor?
If the gentlelady so states. For what purpose does Representative Petrie rise?
Parliamentary inquiry, Mr. Speaker.
State your inquiry.
Mr. Speaker, it's not true that just less than a year ago, the Fulton County DA stated that gangs were responsible for nearly 75 to 80% of violent crimes in Atlanta.
I'm sure the gentleman believes what he so states. For what purpose does Representative Chaz Cannon rise?
I waive.
He waives. For what purpose does Representative Lisa Campbell rise?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Isn't it true, Mr. Speaker, that the Brookings Institute recently researched and found that in states that have implemented Medicaid expansion, they have seen reductions in violent crime by 5.8% and property crime by 3%, and resulted in cost savings of $13.6 billion due to these reductions in crimes? And based on this evidence and these strategies, shouldn't we be investing in expanding access to health care if we are sincerely interested in reducing gang recruitment and violence?
If the gentlelady so states, I'm sure she believes. For what purpose does Representative Okoye rise?
Parliamentary inquiry, Mr. Speaker.
State your inquiry.
Mr. Speaker, isn't it true that during the debate on SB 140, the transgender bill, we were told that children up to 18 years and even above are not fully formed to make decisions on by themselves, but today we are also seeking to punish those children for what could be an uninformed decision. There's some level of hypocrisy in that, Mr. Speaker.
If the gentleman so states, for what purpose does Representative Adesanya rise?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Isn't it true that common sense gun reform is the true measure to keeping our communities safe rather than extending mandatory minimum sentence?
I'm sure the gentleman believes what he so states.
Further inquiry.
One more inquiry.
Is it not true that extending mandatory minimum prison time doesn't really send tough messages to communities, but instead it sends more black, male, and other minorities to fill up private prison beds?
I'm sure the gentleman believes what he so states. For what purpose does Representative David Clark rise?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Is it not true that in 2020 I was off serving my country in uniform, away from my family, and in the middle of the night there was a drive-by shooting? My wife, kids were asleep, and they were safe. But would this bill not help actually crack down on gang violence and protect our communities?
We appreciate the gentleman's service to this country, and I'm sure he believes what he so states on what happened in his neighborhood. For what purpose does Representative Bentley rise?
Parliamentary inquiry, Mr. Speaker.
State your inquiry.
Mr. Speaker, is it not true that I do appreciate all of the comments that were made by all of the colleagues in this chamber this afternoon, but I've also been, throughout the debate, reaching out to constituents in my district, and the vast majority of them have asked for my support of this legislation. Even a funeral director who's preparing to bury a small child that was killed by a stray bullet. Is that not true, Mr. Speaker?
I'm sure if the gentlelady states that's true, and she certainly believes in what she speaks. We'll take a couple of more. For what purpose does Representative Panich rise?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Isn't it not true that, as Representative Tyler Paul Smith said, I'm a criminal defense attorney, and that many of us charge more depending on the length of sentence that could be imposed if there's a conviction?
I'm not sure how y'all charge.
May I further inquire?
It's usually a lot, but yes, state your inquiry.
May I further inquire?
State your inquiry.
And is it not further true that even though I would have a financial incentive to vote yes on this bill because I could charge more for more minimum mandatory crimes, that I'm choosing to vote against this bill because of the damage that minimum mandatory sentences do to this country?
If the gentlelady so states, I'm sure she believes. I'm going to take two more. Representative Romine, I think you have a inquiry. For what purpose do you rise?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Is it not true that the name of this bill, Street Gang Terrorism and Prevention Act, sounds like a great idea and something that our communities need? Because unfortunately, many of them have been negatively impacted by this violence. However, as we heard today, the conversation is not that gang violence is not a bad thing or not a problem. It is that the solution we are pursuing is going to harm a lot of people.
I'm sure the lady believes in what she so states. For what purpose does Chairman Knight rise?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Mr. Speaker, isn't it true, in addition to the story I told in the well, that just a little over a week ago in Griffin, Georgia, 11-year-old little girl was killed in drive-by shootings, and that the suspect, who they are now chasing, is also wanted in violation of the Georgia Street Gang Act? Isn't it true also, Mr. Speaker, that Georgians are fed up with gang violence?
I'm sure the gentleman believes what he speaks. I am going to take two more, and this is going to be it. I want to recognize the lady from the 165th, Representative Jackson, for what purpose did you rise, Representative?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
To my colleagues here, isn't it true that I spoke in the well the other day regarding my nephew that was shot in Savannah in the head? But as I look at this bill today, is it not true that we as members of this House should listen to what is being said? As it not true, as I look at this, there is no Democratic side that is put on here as voting for this bill. Is it not true that this should be sent back to the House or to the Senate to ask for some changes as they better affect what is happening in our community? We had a reduction in Savannah in gang-related by working together. Shouldn't this, if we are going to vote on this today, shouldn't we have some things up there that said that this was a decision that was made by both the Democratic and the Republicans in this House, and that we do not have to follow what is happening on the other side of the hall? Thank you.
If the gentlelady so states, have all members voted? Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machine. On the passage of the bill, the yeas were 99, the nays 74. The bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. Mr. Clerk, will you read the caption to Senate Bill 61? We're moving on to supplemental calendar that was set this morning. Mr. Clerk, Senate Bill 61.
Senate Bill 61 by Senator Strickland of the 17th to be entitled an act to amend Code Section 34.110 of the official code of Georgia annotated relating to the use of sick leave for care of immediate family members so as to repeal the sunset provision relating to such sick leave requirements. This bill having referred to the Committee on Industry and Labor, that committee recommends that this bill do pass.
Representative Daniel is recognized to present the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm so excited to bring something I hope we can all agree on after our couple of hours of debating that important legislation. Today, I rise to bring Senate Bill 61, which was carried by my counterpart on the other side, Senator Strickland. This bill is a wonderful piece of legislation that will end the sunset clause in the Family Care Act, which was passed with bipartisan support in the legislature back in 2017. The bill before you doesn't tell you what that is, so I did come prepared to tell you what the Family Care Act does. It simply allows employees who already earn paid sick days to use up to 5 of those days per year to care for a sick loved one. It does not require employees to offer any additional paid sick days beyond what they already provide their employers. Let's see. This law has been in effect for the last 6 years, and it has shown that it is something that's good for employers and families in our state, and so we believe at this time it would be a good move to remove that sunset provision. And let's see. When it was originally introduced, it had a 3-year provision. So this would be the second time that we would be extending it, and so they have actually chosen to just remove it altogether. And I think this is a good move for us as we continue the efforts to make Georgia the best place to live, work, and raise our families. So I ask for your favorable support, and will yield the well if there are no questions.
You have no questions. The lady has yielded the well. Is there any objection to the previous question being ordered? Chair hears none. The previous question is ordered. Is there any objection to agreeing to the report of the committee, which was favorable to the passage of the bill? Chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Shall this bill now pass? All in favor of the passage of the bill will vote yes. All those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machine. For what purpose does Representative Sampson rise? He waits. Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machine. On the passage of the bill, the yeas were 172, the nays were 1. The bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. Mr. Clerk, will you read the caption to Senate Bill 90?
Senate Bill 90 by Senator Dixon of the 45th and others, to be entitled an act to amend Chapter 1 of Title 10 of the Official Code of Georgia Annotated relating to selling and other practices so as to provide for commercial financing disclosures. This bill has been referred to the Committee on Banks and Banking. That committee recommends that this bill do pass by committee substitute.
The gentleman from the 118th is recognized, Representative Crowe, to present the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Colleagues, this is Senate Bill 90. As stated, it is a revenue-based financing provision that allows for a current form of financing that many small and medium-sized businesses use when traditional bank loan is not the best option. This may sound familiar to you. Representative Rhodes earlier in this session had House Bill 84, which essentially did the same thing, that passed out of this House and was sent over to the Senate. This is a Senate version companion bill that they had coming back. In addition to that portion, though, we have a portion added to it in the substitute that was a bill that I had, House Bill 471. And House Bill 471 dealt with some predatory real estate practices. Midway through 2020, Georgia began seeing a new real estate predatory practice. Typically, a scenario would go something like this. Homeowners offered cash as part of a homeowner program. In reality, the homeowner is coerced into entering a 40-year listing agreement for their home. The listing agreement then filed at the clerk's office and a covenant running with the land for those 40 years. So when them, or particularly their heirs, would inherit it and try to sell the property, there would be a cloud on the title, and they wouldn't be able to sell the property unless they paid that company percentage, typically 3% of whatever they decided the value of that property was, in order to sell the property. So it's currently estimated that there are as many as 7,000 of those currently recorded in the state of Georgia. What this portion of the legislation seeks to do is to cut off the spigot, creating more of those. It would establish it as an action listed in the Fair Business Practices Act of 1975. It would stop them from being able to record those or be used as a cloud against the title. And then sections 3, 4, and 6 would deal with wholesalers. These are the folks that send out a notice saying they want to buy your home. In actuality, they want to get a listing or a option to buy your home, and they go out and market that. And what they're trying to do is avoid real estate licensure laws and prohibitions against net listings. So they want to get it under contract so they can market it and then sell it for an increased amount and keep the difference between those. So that's what this bill is seeking to do on both those accounts, Mr. Speaker, and I will answer any questions if folks have those.
Gentleman yields for a question.
I do.
Representative Jasmine Clark to your left has a question. Representative Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the gentleman yield?
Yes, ma'am, I do.
All right, so we did discuss this, but I wanted to know if you got an answer to the question. Line 103, the bill states that a commercial financing transaction that's more than $500,000 does not, this bill would not apply to them. Do you ever find out why?
Yes, ma'am. And much like the other question you had, which is why it was more than 5 transactions, that's the cutoff that they decided to put in here. Most of these transactions are going to be between $50,000 and $100,000. Very rarely are they even going to go over $200,000. So it's very unlikely that there would be any that would go over 500 because it is a risky proposition to lend that amount of money. So that was the cutoff when they tried to narrow down this portion of the law.
Does the gentleman further yield?
Yes, ma'am.
And then further down on lines 118 through 120, it talks about there only needing to be one disclosure, even if you were to change or basically modify or go through a forbearance or change the financing, commercial financing transaction. Are there any concerns about the people who are being financed? You know, if there was a change, there's no requirement that they have to do a new disclosure for that.
Right, and it does say that it's a disclosure is not required as a result of modification, forbearance, or change to a consummated commercial transaction. So that would be one that had already been consummated. So I guess I didn't see a need to need to redisclose that. It's already been consummated.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Gentleman, further yield.
Yes, sir.
Representative Roberts to your left in front of you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the gentleman yield?
I do.
Isn't it true that the latter part of the bill, that I was a co-sponsor, and that this predatory practice among these companies, being a licensed realtor myself and a real estate lawyer, it is preying on our most vulnerable, our elderly community. They're in desperate situations. They take $700 cash and don't realize that they are locked into a covenant running with their land for 40 years.
That's exactly right. And typically from what the investigations have shown into some of these is that these folks are typically targeting elderly and lower income homeowners, and folks that would be more desperate to seek out something like this.
No further questions.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield the will.
Gentleman has yielded the will. Representative Becky Evans is recognized to speak to the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Colleagues, today I rise to support Senate Bill 90, but also to express concern that it does not go far enough to protect these legacy homeowners from deceptive business practices, which I know is important to all of us. We need to pass legislation that provides for disclosure requirements for wholesale buyers and sellers of residential real property. We need to do more to define and regulate wholesale sellers. Lines 178 to 208 are fine in terms of some kind of transparency, but they don't really do anything to combat deceptive real estate wholesalers. They're only required to disclose that they're soliciting, but not the fact that they're simply an intermediary between the seller and buyer, not the actual buyer. Disclosing their actual intent is the most important piece, in my opinion. Also, I didn't see that a deceived seller has any recourse to terminate the contract on their home. Currently, wholesalers are permitted to oversee real estate transactions with no licensing, training, or education requirements. It's the Wild Wild West, and they're playing with people's homes. It's no accident that if you run a Google search for real estate wholesaling Georgia, 2 of the first results that come up are questions about whether or not it's legal. There's an article that I want to tell you all about that illuminates what Representative Crow and Representative Roberts have talked about, where the wholesalers are taking advantage of elderly home sailors. It says a booming Atlanta real estate market may make some elderly homeowners a target. Homeowners are selling their houses for tens and even hundreds of thousands of dollars less than they are worth. One elderly woman contacted Channel 2 after she sold her Southwest Atlanta home for more than $140,000 less than the real estate site Zillow estimated it was worth. The woman did not want to be interviewed, and her name is not being used. The investigative reporter spoke with the real estate broker who found the elderly woman on the side of the road with her belongings while the wholesalers who bought her home cleared it out. The wholesaler, listen to this, the wholesaler would come to her house every single day and beg her to sell. She would say no. Then they started bringing her dinner. Then they started asking her if she needed her medication picked up from the pharmacy. They befriended her. Another person got a call about a woman who had just sold her home who needed help buying a condo. She didn't have enough money for a condo, and she was almost 80 years old. And so it's the West End by the Atlanta Beltline. It's the hottest, juiciest neighborhood right now in Atlanta. The woman's Southwest Atlanta home was purchased by Green Sky Properties on July 30th of this year for $95,000. The same day, Green Sky Properties sold the home to Nigeri Warfield for $130,000. Zillow estimated the home was worth more than $240,000. Atlanta legal aid attorney Sarah Stein told Gray that wholesalers typically shop for houses that aren't for sale. Stein said the wholesalers buying homes for less than market value and reselling them to investors the same day is a calculated technique. They are literally doing nothing to the property and selling it the same day to somebody else for significantly more. The wholesale group that was involved in the purchase of the elderly woman's home holds weekly training sessions called Wholesale Live in Southwest Atlanta. The producer paid $35 to attend this session where the Wholesale Live crew had her cold call owners off-market homes around the metro area. Their technique is not to take no for an answer and to try to get homeowners to sign a contract on the same day. The wholesalers provide a script for cold callers. If an attendee's lead resulted in a signed contract, they would get a cut from the state. It's like a boiler room atmosphere. Everyone is in here, one room, making phone calls. When they went to the Wholesale Live session to ask about their elderly woman's home, the organizer said the woman approached their team about selling her home. She said, "My name's not on any documents." Williams is not on any of the home sale documents that the Channel 2 reviewed, but her Instagram follows every step of the purchase and renovation of the elderly woman's home. Williams and the fellow Wholesale Live instructor appeared in a posted testimonial video at the closing attorney's office on the day of the sale to talk about the elderly woman's experience working with the team. The elderly woman said, "They're like my children." In other videos, Williams documents the flipping process, including inviting Instagram followers to a demo party to educate them on the renovation process. Of course, guys, when you acquire properties, especially directly from the seller, and they've been in their house a long time, it's possible you may run into some of these type of situations recorded in the basement of the elderly woman's home, explaining that they would have to remove 47 years worth of furniture and other properties. David Blake with Georgia's Department of Human Services Division of Aging trains police across the state to investigate elder abuse cases. Blake told Gray deceiving an elder to buy their home in a bargain could be a crime. So Channel 2 has not found evidence that the wholesalers are committing a crime, and that's what I hope our body might address. But an Atlanta police fraud investigator did contact the news station with questions on the case. The news station passed the investigator's information on to the elderly woman's attorney. Whether it was a crime or not, the situation the elderly woman was put in is wrong. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind that they took advantage of her. So we need to do more, I hope, in our next legislative session to be able to protect these elderly people from abuse. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I yield the well.
The lady has yielded the well. Is there any objection to the previous question being ordered? The chair hears none. The previous question is ordered. Is there any objection to adopting the committee's substitute? The chair hears none. The committee's substitute is adopted. Is there any objection to agreeing to the report of the committee, which was favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Shall this bill now pass? All in favor of the passage of the bill will vote yes. All those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machine. For what purpose does Representative Jasmine Clark rise?
Parliamentary inquiry, Mr. Speaker.
State your inquiry.
Is it not true that I wholeheartedly support the portion of this bill that is for consumer protection, but I still have serious concerns about the portion of the bill that was previously HB 84 with the arbitrary limits and lack of disclosure requirements, and that I and many of my colleagues voted no on that bill when it was before the body earlier this year?
If the lady so states. Have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machine. On the passage of the bill, the yeas were 163, the nays 9. The bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. Members, we're going to take up one more bill, but before I do, I want to tell you I made a misstep. Representative Michelle Henson, who served in this body for many years, was a valued member, was here on the floor a little bit earlier, and I apologize to her. So if you see her, be sure you recognize her and thank her for her service to this body and to this state. Representative Michelle Henson, a valued member of this body. Mr. Clerk, will you read the caption to SB 93, Senate Bill 93?
Senate Bill 93 by Senator Anna Duarte of the 31st and others, to be entitled an act to amend Chapter 29 and Title 50 of the Official Code of Georgia Annotated related to information technology so as to restrict the use of certain social media platforms on state equipment. This bill item referred to the Committee on Public Safety and Homeland Security. That committee recommends that this bill do pass by committee substitute.
Chair recognizes Representative Clint Crow, to present the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Seems like forever since I've been here. This is the last bill, so I will be brief on this. I know y'all all have other places to be and other things to do, as do I. So, Senate Bill 93, well, a little feedback. Senate Bill 93 is a technology bill, passed 50 to nothing in the Senate, and what it does is it prohibits the use of social media on state-owned devices when the social media platform is owned or operated by a foreign adversary or by a company which is domiciled in, has headquarters in, or is organized under the laws of a foreign adversary, specifically TikTok in this instance. But that is the bill, and I would stand for any questions, Mr. Speaker.
Gentlemen, yield.
I do.
Representative Jason Ridley from the 6th to your extreme right over here has a question. Representative Ridley.
I just got one question. How do you know where something's connected to?
So that,
I think that's my answer. Thank you, sir.
yeah, I think, I don't think somebody wants me to answer that question. But anyway, it would be determined by the director of the Department of Georgia Homeland Security Department. And those foreign adversaries are listed by the federal government and updated. This will be updated on the list for January 1st, 2023. So, yeah.
I think the sound system's getting tired. I think that's what's going on.
It is. I'll stand way over here.
Representative Williams is recognized for a question to your left.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you for the bill.
think it's a good bill. I'm a little confused. That baritone. Explain to me if we're going to knock TikTok out of the business. We got a little boatyard in Savannah that's loaded down with Chinese material that Americans can't get more. They can't break the habit. We take TikTok down. Help me understand how we keep loading Chinese products into America.
Well, sir, I wish I could help you with that. I can't answer that. And this is not knocking TikTok out of business on your personal device. It's just on the state employees or students on state-owned devices that it's being banned from. Yeah.
Representative Ramon is recognized for a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the gentleman yield?
I do.
So it appears that there has been extensive conversation about TikTok, but is it not true that a lot of social media companies currently do track a lot of our data and do sell it to other companies? So why this particular interest in only TikTok? And for the record, I understand that we need to keep some of these social media applications off our state devices, but I am curious why this wasn't sort of brought into other tech-related issues.
I think it's because of the fact that it's owned or controlled or overseen by a foreign adversary, in this case, China. And so, and again, it's not trying to prohibit it from your personal device. This is just trying to make sure that our state-owned devices that are used by state employees and students are secured. And TikTok, like I said, this is specifically targeting those social media sites that are owned or controlled by a foreign adversary as determined by the federal government.
Gentleman yield for another question.
I'll take one more, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Saines, Chairman Saines to your left.
Does the gentleman yield?
I do.
Is it not true that this bill is specific to the state devices to ensure that our citizens' data is kept secure, and however the larger conversation on the distinction between data security and the youth health in terms of social media usage is part of a broader conversation that can be addressed but is not part of this bill?
Yes, sir, that is exactly correct. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I will yield the will and ask for this body's favorable consideration.
The gentleman has yielded the will. Is there any objection to the previous question being ordered? The chair hears none. The previous question is ordered. Is there any objection to adopting the committee substitute? The chair hears none. The committee substitute is adopted. Is there any objection to agreeing to the report of the committee, which was favorable to the passage of the bill? The chair hears none. The report of the committee is agreed to. Shall this bill now pass? All in favor of the passage of the bill will vote yes. All those opposed will vote no, and the clerk will unlock the machine. For what purpose does Chairman Wiedauer rise?
Parliamentary inquiry.
State your inquiry.
Is it not true that this bill will not keep Representative Crow from posting on social media the pending birth of his second grandchild today?
I'm sure the gentleman knows what he speaks on both sides. Congratulations. Boy or girl? Little boy. Congratulations. Another crow added to the nest. So, have all members voted? If so, the clerk will lock the machine. On the passage of the bill, the yeas were 174, the nays 0. The bill, having received the requisite constitutional majority, is therefore passed. That concludes our calendar for today. we will carry Senate Bill 135, Senate Bill 64, that would be carried over and postponed to our next legislative day. We have some afternoon orders. Representative Kendrick, have you found your voice? She's found her voice. Representative Kendrick's recognized for an afternoon order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I just wanted to come up here and say thank you to all of you that called during my brief laryngitis. I'm still trying to get back better. But even the jokes that you had for me, they were well welcome. And I appreciate Representative Neal and Carter and Roberts being the DK whisperer for a few days. But I really did learn a lesson losing my voice. And it really was that when you lose something that is so important to you, you take it for granted when you don't have it anymore. So I was able to listen more. But now that I have my voice back, I have some things to say. And I just thank you that you were so supportive. And now that I got my voice back, I am back. And thank you again, Mr. Speaker.
I really enjoyed our conversation when you couldn't talk. I'm glad you have your voice back. You may have lost your voice for a few days. You didn't lose your influence. Representative Teddy Reese is recognized for an afternoon order. Members, pay attention to the gentleman in the well.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Colleagues, I stand to remind you that today at 5 o'clock, we will be remembering our classmate, Tish Nagisi, the front of the Capitol here in Washington Street. We invite you to come join us. It will be a very short program, but we think it will be one that's fitting to her memory, one that will give me and our classmates, our freshman class, an opportunity to wish our classmate a farewell and to send our love to her. Today, if you notice, we are wearing our purple ribbons in her memory. So come and join us at 5 o'clock, if you will, for the Dove release, and so we can share one last great moment about our colleague. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Representative Reese and freshman class. That concludes our afternoon orders. For what purposes, Representative Maynard rise?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that the rules be...
Would you like to state a motion?
I'd like to state a motion. I move that the...
State your motion.
I move that the rules be temporarily suspended so that a bill may be read for the first time and assigned to committee.
Clerk will read the caption.
Unnumbered House Bill by Representative Maynard, the 56th, and others to be titled an act to amend the act creating the Fulton County and Energy Enhancement Authority.
On the lady's motion that the rules of the House be temporarily suspended so a bill can be read for the first time and assigned to committee, is there objection? Intergovernmental coordination. We have some announcements. Chair Lady Ballinger is recognized for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your Juvenile Justice Committee will meet upon the conclusion of the Public Health Committee, which is in 606 CLOB. So there's going to be Public Health. Then we're going to, after that's concluded, then we will have the Juvenile Justice Committee meeting there. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Chairman Smith is recognized for an announcement. Chairman Richard Smith. He waved. He left. Chair Lady Cooper is recognized for an announcement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Public Health will meet immediately on adjournment from this chamber, immediately in room 606. And we do have a committee following us, so please, everybody, let's get me a quorum, and we'll have 2 short bills that the Senate is waiting on, and we'll get out and let the next committee meet. Thank you. 404, 606, Public Health now.
Chairman Todd Jones is recognized for an announcement.
Good afternoon, colleagues, members of the Technology and Infrastructure Innovation Committee. We are going to meet at 4 o'clock. That's in 5 minutes in CLOB 406. We'll be hearing a bill and hopefully voting on a bill. Thank you.
Representative Adonia is recognized for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker. This announcement for all freshmen, doesn't matter what party you are, we're taking a picture, a memorable picture by the steps, on the south steps, right after we adjourn. So just meet by the south steps. Thank you.
Chairman Tyler Paul Smith is recognized for an announcement.
Mr. Speaker, your committee of the House Judiciary Non-Civil will meet upon adjournment in room 132 of the Capitol, of the Capitol upon adjournment.
Chairman Chuck Martin is recognized for an announcement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Your Committee on Higher Education meets right now, 506 in the CLOB, 506 CLOB.
For what purposes, Leader Estration rise? No.
Make a motion.
State your motion.
Mr. Speaker, I move that Senate Resolution 214 be moved from Ways and Means to Governmental Affairs. Both chairmen have agreed.
Clerk, read the caption.
Senate Resolution 214 by Senator Ginn of the 47th, creating a joint study committee on local option sales tax and service delivery strategy.
On the gentleman's motion that SR 214 be removed from Ways and Means to Governmental Affairs Committee, is there objection? Hearing none, it is so ordered. That completes our announcements. We have no birthdays. It's a good day. We don't have any page photos. We've completed those. The majority leader is recognized for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that this House stand adjourned until 10 a.m. on Tuesday, March 21st, 2023.
On the motion of the majority leader that this House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. Tuesday, March 21st, 2023. All those in favor will say aye. All opposed, no. Oh, yeah, the ayes have it. We're adjourned.